Everyone in Onitsha and beyond knew the name Uzochukwu Nwafor. Uzo, because his name came with an address, a compound of glass and marble on the high road, a fleet of cars, and a smile that made strangers forgive small cruelties. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and made the light adjust. Tall, well-built, dark-skinned, with a jawline that fashioned magazine covers and a presence that turned heads, Uzo wore wealth like armor. He had been born into it. His father's factories hummed across states. His mother hosted galas where governors lingered. From childhood he learned that doors opened when he knocked, and that other people's time and dignity were negotiable. But money often sharpens edges. In Uzo's case, privilege had etched arrogance into the bones. He developed a taste for derision. He detested waiting staff who asked questions, road vendors who didn't move fast enough, a niece who giggled at his expensive watch. Compliments encouraged him. Apology felt like surrender. He spoke in imperatives and laughter that clipped people's wings. If you told him to be kinder, he'd flash a smile and call it sentimentality, and that made him laugh harder. December came, and with it the ancestral pull every wealthy son in the diaspora knew. The homecoming to Anambra, where blood remembered the smell of red earth and kola nut. Uzo went back for the annual December celebration. Masquerades, family dinners, elders in soft wrappers, more out of duty to be seen than to belong. He arrived in a convoy, phone buzzing and cameras waiting. The village stared and the town gossiped. He paraded through the market with a swagger that made small vendors withdraw like branches from a passing drum. He bought fish, laughed at old friends who recognized him, and tossed cash like confetti. Then, in the open-air square under a sky the market hawkers called their cathedral, an old woman sat by a stall. Her hair was thin as straw. Her teeth were mostly stories. People curved their paths politely around her, as one does for a relic. She had eyes like river stones, clouded but not blind. Uzo's driver hesitated as oxen carts crossed. Uzo rolled down his window, leaned out, and spoke with the bareness of a judge passing sentence. "Move your load. You're blocking the road," he snarled, as if the world truly owed him ease. The hawkers' mouths tightened. The old woman's hands paused in their work. She raised her head and spoke in a voice that smelled of smoke and rain, soft but steady. "Son," she said, "words are seeds. Some grow to shade you, some grow to break you." Uzo laughed, a short, cruel sound, and tossed a coin with the disdain of a man who had never had to buy goodwill. "Keep your riddles. I have places to be," he said. The old woman's face, for a moment, changed into something older than sorrow. She leaned forward and, without raising her voice, said, "On your way to celebrate, remember, the celebration remembers you too." Uzo drove off, the market murmurs swallowed by the roar of his engine. He did not know then that a seed had already slipped into the soil of his life, and that December, with its nights of masquerade and the slow-burning hearths of Anambra, would be more than a parade. It would be the turning of a wheel. The December nights in Umans were dense with laughter and palm wine. The air smelled of roasted yams, grilled fish, and the smoke of ritual fires. Uzo arrived at his father's ancestral home amid drums and ululations, anointed by greetings and the glare of cameras. He wore a cassava-white agbada for the Duru night, but the fabric couldn't soften the hardness in his eyes. The family orchestra played. The elders blessed palm oil on wrists. Children chased masquerades with shrieks. Uzo's presence was a headline. "Golden Sun returns." Ibas. That evening, after the elders had spoken and the kola had been offered, the town's masquerade, the Ogbianaik, danced through the courtyard. Masked figures spun like storms. Drums talked to bones. The celebration beckoned everyone to humility. Masks blurred rank. For a beat, every soul was equal under the drum's law. Uzo, however, considered himself above that ritual alchemy. He stood, champagne glass raised, scanning the crowd for familiar faces, impatient for the next selfie. A thin man with cracked palms and a smile like a doorframe approached the food table. He was a childhood friend, now gray, who greeted Uzo with a hand that trembled. Yuzo gave a curt nod and then, bored, turned to watch a small commotion by the compound's back gate. There, at the behest of curiosity or fate, the old market woman had come, slow as an evening tide, to watch the festivities unseen by the cameras. The air shifted. She stood at the corner of the flickering lanterns, her wrapper modest, her eyes gleaming faintly. Someone offered her a cola nut, but the old woman waved it away. She watched Yuzo with the cool interest of a person who reads weather in bones. Yuzo caught her gaze and scowled. "You're in the way," he told her, his voice sharp. "Take your pity and move." The old woman's face tightened like a closing book. "Pity is not mine," she said. "But please your heart, child. Mind your tongue." Yuzo laughed loud and mean. "Mind my tongue," he sneered. "Mind your place, old hag. This is a celebration for the living, not for ghosts." Hush fell like thick cloth. People shuffled. Even the drums faltered at the edge of duty. The woman's eyes did not flinch. She took a step closer and so quietly that only the nearest could hear, she said, "Words are mirrors, Yuzo. Today you break them. Tomorrow they will show you what you have become." Yuzo's smile cut deeper. "Spare me the parables," he said. "I have no time for stories told by wrinkled lips." The insult was a stone thrown into the river. Its ripples traveled farther than Yuzo imagined. The old woman's fingers dug into the wrapper at her waist. She breathed a prayer like an ember and then, in a voice that seemed to come from the earth itself, she said, "So be it." Yuzo puffed with triumph and moved away, certain the night still belonged to him. He would learn that triumphs can be hollow as dried gourds. Yet in that courtyard beneath laughter and drums, a curse, wound tight and patient, began to braid itself into the air, seeking a root. The first sign was small and ridiculous. Yuzo woke with a hunger that money couldn't soothe. His private chef had prepared an entire table of delicacies, jollof, peppered fish, oha soup with fresh stockfish, but when Yuzo reached, his hands felt like uninvited guests in someone else's memory. Tasting, he found the food bland as water. The champagne fizzed no joy. He blamed fatigue, jet lag, the high of the celebration tapering away. He went to sleep convinced the morning would clarity. Morning brought a stranger instead. Yuzo's mirror offered no reflection. He stood frozen, half-dressed in his embroidered shirt, and searched the glass as if the man he expected might hide behind the vanity. The bathroom held his cologne and his shaving kit, his watch and cufflinks, all the tokens of identity. Yet when he raised his hand, the mirror showed only a room and the faint tremor of light. He turned, expecting someone to jump from behind the door with a prank. There was no one. He called his driver, ordered his bodyguard, but their faces tightened and they bowed away as if the room had grown thin and dangerous. Panic landed like rain in his bones. He walked through the house and saw it anew. Servants whispering in corners, children peeking through doors. His father, when told, hugged the family's dignity around him and said, "Perhaps the stress of travel. Rest, my son. We will call the doctor." But Yuzo's voice trembled with a fear he had never met before. The fear of being unseen, of being ordinary and unwanted. Outside the compound, the town spoke. Rumor is a gossiping god in Anambra. People told of the insult, of the old woman's words, and of a curse that took form in the night. A few elders came with cola and proverbs, but none could explain how a reflection could vanish. A witch doctor with beads and a jingling staff muttered about boundaries crossed. Yuzo, who had once been the center of jokes and admiration, felt the social scaffolding loosen. Friends stopped visiting. Contracts paused. The bank politely suggested he should attend to family matters and would resume calls later. The old woman did not seek him out. Instead, she watched from the shadows, as one watches a pyre needing tending. When Yuzo finally found her at the market, his heart exposed like raw meat, she did not gloat. She touched his wrist with fingers that smelled of cola and bitter leaf. "You called me hag," she said. "I called you truth." Yuzo sank to his knees. "Please," he begged. "Take it back. I will give anything. I will change." The old woman looked at him with eyes that held the slow patience of harvests. "Your words uprooted the law," she said. "Curses are not taken back like coins. They must be cleansed. You must learn humility where you have sown pride. Go to your hometown. Live among those you scorned. Mend what you broke. Only then will you find your reflection." Uzo, stripped of his mirror self, recognized a single terrifying fact. If he did not amend the wound within him, the world would not mirror him back at all. The curse had made him small in a manner he could not buy his way out of. And so began his journey, not across borders or in convoys, but inward, toward the people whose faces he had never learned to value. Uzo's return to the core of Anambra was quieter than his arrival had been. Without an entourage, without the camera flashes and the ceremonial fanfare, he stepped onto the dusty lane like someone who had forgotten the way home. The village that had once applauded his name now measured him in passing glances. An unremarkable man with heavy feet. He walked past cola-stained porches and oil lamps, past children playing with tins and string, past the old market where hawkers shouted like prayer leaders. He moved to the compound of his childhood, though the house felt smaller without the architecture of pride to hold him. He asked for food as a neighbor might. He took a mat by the fire and listened to the stories elders told of seasons and pestles. For the first time, he sat without commanding, without adjusting the course of the conversation. He smelled roasted yam and heard, for the first time, the music in ordinary voices. At first, his efforts to mend were clumsy. He attempted to buy forgiveness with money, sliding envelopes under doors and dropping bills into hands. The elders shook their heads. "Money does not unmake a word," one said softly. "It pays debts, not hearts." He tried grand gestures, building a small borehole at the crossroads to show generosity. People used the water and praised the convenience, but the praise felt like the ripple from a stone, not the warm embrace he wished to feel. What changed everything slowly were the small, unglamorous acts. Uzo began waking before dawn to help the yam farmers. He sat on stoops and mended nets, learning hands that had always been unseen. He carried firewood for a widow whose hands ached. He stayed when a child fell ill and sat without fanning for applause. He listened to the stories of artisans, not as a critic but as a student. People began to notice the different weight in his steps. They saw a man learning to carry another person's burden without measuring the cost. The old woman watched from her corner in the market. She saw the confession in his actions more eloquent than any words could be. She had not asked for flashy signs. She demanded in her curse the slow, sunburnt work of repentance. The villagers, who had once been smoothed by his disdain, now let their guard down a little. "Uzo," an old friend said one evening, "do you remember when we used to swim in the river and you would beat me in races?" Uzo laughed and humbly. "I remember how you always let me win when I pretended to be tired," he said. The friend's face softened. As the days lengthened, Uzo's mirror returned in little ways. A child's smile, a neighbor's nod. The curse did not fully lift yet. It had become a teacher with a strict timetable. He began to understand that cleansing was not a ritual alone but a remaking. Humility forged in action, not announcements. The wound inside him, the part that had loved himself like a throne, began to shrink, replaced by something quieter, regard for others as equals rather than props. The town's December fires still warm, but for Uzo the colder truth was clearing. To be cleansed he needed first to change the shape of his heart. Humility, Uzo found, was not a single task but a curriculum of small humiliations that sculpted the soul. The old woman's instruction was simple in words and brutal in application. Live where you once triumphed over simple lives. Serve them. Do not ask for trophies. So Uzo did. He rose with the wives who headed to the cassava pits. He sat in the market as a porter carrying bowls on his head until his neck ached. People whispered at first, "See, the man who wore silver now wears sweat." But sweat, unlike silver, left stains that could not be polished away. Each trial had a lesson. One day a fisherman, whose boat had been broken by storm, bent under the burden of his nets. Uzo offered help and, in lifting a net that smelled of river, learned the language of fatigue. He heard the fisherman's quiet pride in providing for his family, and realized how often he had made that same pride invisible. Another day, Uzo was asked to fetch maduga seeds for a nursing mother. He returned late with the seeds and a story about the road he had taken. The woman smiled and said, "Good hands know the right path." He understood she meant the path of doing what must be done, unglorified. Not all attempts succeeded. Once he tried to mend a teacher's broken desk in the primary school. He bought wood, hired labor, and watched as the craftsman made straight joints. The teacher praised the wood's finish but refused to accept the money Uzo offered as reward. "You must learn that giving does not demand ownership," she told him, and placed a small chalkboard into his hands, a symbol of trust rather than charity. On another afternoon, a boy he had once mocked for his torn shoes kicked a football at him and scored a goal. Uzo, who years before might have hooted, clapped and ran after the ball. The boy's smile was an unmeasured currency. The old woman's curse resided in the unglamorous. It required Uzo to be inconvenienced by life the way ordinary people were. He lived without his driver, walked in the rain with his sari plastered to his back, and for the first time understood how weather could be a daily adversary. He learned to wait in queues without cutting. He learned to eavesdrop on conversation, not to locate gossip but to understand needs. The real tests, though, were inside him. Pride is a stubborn guest. When an old classmate who now sold roasted corn sneered, Uzo resisted the urge to retort with wealth's language. When a contract that promised to bring funds into the village collapsed, Uzo did not storm or threaten. He sat with the disappointed artisans and helped them patch their stalls. The villagers began to see repetition in his acts. This was not a game. The smallness of each day's mercy piled up into weight. The old woman nodded from her market stool and placed cola at her feet like a patient judge awaiting a verdict. Slowly, the mirror that had been stolen from him began to reflect not only a face but a face softened by learning. The scar that would finally remind him of his past arrogance was not yet etched, but the lines of change were already forming. Uzo's heart was being rewired by ordinary necessity, the kind of work no amount of money could outsource. News of Uzo's transformation reached the elders, who convened beneath the ancient Iroko tree one warm afternoon. They had watched him learn. They had watched the humbling sheen replace swagger. The clan elder, a woman whose hair had become white as palm fiber, called for a cleansing ritual, not a spectacle, but a rite to mark passage from arrogance to humility. A man changes not in secret alone. The village must witness the renewal, she said. The old woman from the market, who had set the lessons, sat quietly with a cup of bitter tea, her presence like a slow drumbeat. The ritual was simple, rooted in Anambra's older laws. Uzo was to fast for a day, go to the river at dawn, and lay bare 3 failures. He was to present cola to those he had insulted and to plant 3 yams in a field tended by the poor. The elders led prayers to Ndi Madu, those spirits of human relationship, invoking forgiveness that must be earned, not demanded. Uzo fasted, the hunger reminding him that appetite could be tamed by contrition. At first light he walked to the river, the mist like a shawl. The river was known to be honest. It reflected not aspirations but truth. He knelt on the bank and spoke aloud. His first failure, the arrogance that saw people as props. His second, the cruelty that dismissed age and knowledge. His third, the blindness to the labor that sustained his life. Saying them was harder than any exercise because words had once been used to build walls. Now they were tools for dismantling them. After confession, he poured cola into the palms of those he had wronged. He went to the market and to the huts, and to the woman whose stall he had mocked. Some accepted without comment. Others took time. The people measuring him now watched how persistent his contrition was. He planted yams with palms that bled small cuts from the earth. The act of planting was humble. You bury hope and then wait. There is no immediate applause for seeds, only the risk and faith of growth. That night, the elders gathered in a circle. The old woman came forward and, in a voice that had no triumph left, placed a palm leaf kiss on his brow. "You have buried arrogance into the ground," she said. "Yet ceremonies do not always undo the shape of the heart. Continue to serve." Uzo felt something shift, not a cinematic vanishing of curses, but the slight loosening of chains. He still lacked the mirror's full return, but his reflection came in the faces of people he had helped, in laughter shared genuinely. The ritual did what rituals often do. It marked commitment and clarified direction. The curse, no longer a punishment but a pedagogy, receded like a tide leaving shells of truth on the shore. The following morning, Uzo walked to the river again and looked into the water. For the first time in weeks, he saw a face that belonged to him, not the polished advertisement of wealth, but a man with calloused hands, softer eyes, and an expression that asked forgiveness as much as offered it. The cleansing had begun, and with it, the slow making of a different life. Cleansing is not an epilogue. It is an opening of doors that lead to new responsibilities. Uzo learned this as December gave way to the slow swell of the new year. His actions had earned cautious trust, but trust, once gained, requires proof in storms. The first test came when a factory in the neighboring town threatened to dump waste near a stream the villagers used for drinking. The company, a subsidiary of an old family partner, offered the village compensation that felt like pity. The elders asked Uzo to negotiate. He could have hired lawyers and spun terms in glossy language. Instead, he walked to the site, stood in the mud, and listened to the fishermen whose nets would be poisoned. Uzo took a different approach. He refused to sign compromises without enforcement. He used his connections not to bully, but to force the company to invest in a proper waste treatment plant. He stayed on the site during inspections, holding officials accountable. When the project lagged, he slept in the village guest house and ate the bread others ate. The villagers watched a new kind of leverage, one that protected them rather than exploited them. Another test arrived in the shape of an old rival, Ifani, who had grown rich in his own right and remembered Uzo's worst days. Ifani showed up at a town meeting and publicly questioned whether the Golden Sun's change was a performance. Uzo felt the old reflex of defense rise, to retort with barbs to defend reputation. He remembered the river and the list of failures, and instead chose a different path. He stood, listened to Ifani's grievances, and admitted mistakes in public. He offered to partner with his rival on a project to fund vocational training for youths, proposing transparency and shared governance. The crowd, surprised, heard a man willing to be accountable to people who had once been content to be his audience. These tests stretched beyond grand gestures. A sick child needed funds for a treatment not covered by the clinic. A schoolteacher requested steady supplies rather than one-time handouts. Uzo organized sustainable systems. He sought local input for long-term solutions. He also faced personal tests. Old friends who wanted access to favors returned, demanding leverage of old ties. Uzo refused to leverage his reformed character for old indulgences. He learned that integrity sometimes costs friendships. Through these trials, his reflection steadied. Still scarred but honest, he moved with the unflashy dignity of someone learning that power is a trust, not an entitlement. The villagers began to call him Uzo Ani Madu, Uzo of the people. He did not take the title lightly. The curse, now nearly a lesson with gentle edges, had taught him that character is what you rehearse when no one watches. And when the final trial came, he would need exactly that kind of quiet courage. The final test arrived like an unplanned thunderstorm. A fire broke out at the compound of a widow whose children had once served as garden hands for Uzo's household. The blaze licked at thatch and timber, and panic split the night. Before the engines arrived, neighbors formed a human chain and tried to move buckets of water. Uzo was there, not directing from the porch, but with sleeves rolled, carrying soaked mats and guiding frightened children to safety. When the embers died, the widow collapsed in tears. Uzo stayed until the ash cooled and then, with the elders, helped rebuild the hut using funds he had worked to secure through proper channels. He did not announce it to the press. He did not stage a photograph. He simply worked until the widow slept in a new bed, and the children could again laugh without the memory of smoke. It was in those smoke-quiet hours that the old woman returned. She sat on a low stool, folded her hands, and looked at Uzo's face as if reading weather after a storm. He expected a sermon, a final rebuke. Instead, she reached out and touched the scar that had appeared months before. A thin, pale line across his cheek, a reminder of the night his reflection vanished. "You have been made of sweat," she said, "and of better things. Keep the scar. It will tell you the story when your memory slips." Uzo bowed his head. "I will not forget," he said. The villagers gathered and, under the night sky that smelled faintly of rain, they sang songs of thanksgiving. The masquerades returned, but this time Uzo joined in as one of the people, not as a spectacle. He laughed freely, his laughter now soft and inclusive, and the drums answered him in kind. In time, Uzo reappeared in business circles with a different reputation. He had not lost his wealth, but he had transformed its purpose. He invested in community projects that listened before building. He funded scholarships for deserving youths, and he made sure that the river stayed clean. He wore the scar like an altar of remembrance. If you listen carefully to the elders telling, they say the curse was never a punishment meant to harm, but a medicine, sharp, bitter, and necessary. It stripped what was false to make room for what was true. Uzo's life became a lesson for anyone who thinks wealth can stand in for character. If this story moved you, if the drums in these chapters stirred anything in your heart, please show your support. Like the video, leave a comment with your favorite part of Uzo's journey, and subscribe to the channel for more tales from our land. Stories that speak, challenge, and change. Share this with someone who needs to hear that humility is stronger than gold. Thank you for listening, and may your own reflection always show the person you aim to become.